CNN is yet unconfirmed that the entire Iraqi Air Force has been decimated in this raid by the Allied forces. Now, we don't yet have confirmation of that. So, putting that aside for one moment, can I ask you, what do you feel of the military tactics? What do you think of the military tactics that have been deployed so far?
Well, I think the military tactics are what one would expect. That is, that the Americans and their allies would use to the greatest extent possible their technological advantage, and that they would use that technological advantage to try and disarm Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi forces as quickly as possible in order to minimize the casualties that they themselves may incur, and then also to minimize the possibility of sustained ground warfare.
Most of those planes seem now to have returned to base. We don't know yet if there's been a lull in the attack, whether we're waiting for a second wave. At what point do we think the Allied forces will decide that this airstrike has done part one of the job?
Well, first of all, there will be an ongoing bombing assessment being carried out to try and assess what damage has been inflicted and what remains in the way of a threat as far as the Iraqis are concerned. I don't think you can put a time on that. It will be an ongoing evaluation, no more than that.
What could provoke bringing in ground forces?
Provoke? I would have thought that the coalition would try to avoid the use of ground forces as long as possible. Their aim is to minimize casualties, and particularly casualties in the coalition forces. Their aim, therefore, will be to try and convince the Iraqis that there is no way that they can win in the long run. They will do that by achieving air supremacy as quickly as possible, and that's what they're attempting to do now. And then they will go about the air destruction of as many military targets as possible and as are necessary to convince the Iraqis that there is no point in continuing.
Well, of course, at this stage, there is one entire side missing from the Gulf War. Apart from a couple of unconfirmed reports of artillery fire, as far as we know, Iraq has not yet returned the attack. Is that because they've chosen not to, or because they've been completely thrown by perhaps the success of the first attack? What's holding them back?
Well, one can only speculate. I would have thought, though, it's most likely that their inability, that the fact that they haven't retaliated is because they have been unable to do so, rather than that they have got some devious reason for withholding the attack. After all, the longer they keep their counterattack capability in place unused, the more likely it is to be destroyed before it can be used. I therefore don't believe that it is a devious scheme on their part.
Well, what then is the Iraqi ability to respond, given that they have, if we're to believe these CNN reports, lost their air force?
Well, I'm not quite certain what one means by decimate. In the literal sense, of course, it means they've lost 10% of their air force. I take it that it is the looser use of the word, which means that the air force has been destroyed rather than decimated. That's possible, but it would certainly mean that the Americans and their allies have been more successful than the most ambitious commander would expect.
One factor remains, though. In the character of Saddam Hussein, he's quite a determined character. Perhaps some have chosen to portray him as slightly irrational. Are we dealing, do you think, with a rational general, someone who will behave in a predictable way in commanding his forces?
I don't think we have got any reason to have great confidence in that. I had believed that the Saddam Hussein would have by now found a way out and found a face-saving way of leaving Kuwait before his armed forces were destroyed. And I said so a week ago. To that extent, I've been proved wrong. I've been proved wrong because I didn't analyze, or I didn't understand Saddam Hussein sufficiently, whether he's a stubborn man, whether he's an irrational man, whether he really does believe that he can prevail, I don't know. But no, I don't believe that one can work on the assumption that Saddam Hussein will make his decisions on the same rational and logical basis that perhaps those opposing him would expect.
So Ewan Jamieson, thank you very much indeed. Now, it seems the Allied air forces chose the perfect weather conditions in which to attack. A Christchurch weather consultant says pilots would not only have had the cover of darkness, but would have been flying under heavy cloud cover as well. He says Operation Desert Storm was an apt name for the attack.
Well, this picture was taken early this morning our time, a few hours before the American pilots would have gone to the air. It shows quite a lot of cloud over the whole of Iraq and also in Kuwait there. That white colour indicating heavy cloud. So the pilots would have been flying under heavy cloud cover as well as the cover of darkness.
So perhaps there's an indication there of why the Americans named the operation the way they would. What sort of weather conditions does this produce?
It certainly adds an interesting twist. The large amount of cloud to the north of Iraq is associated with a depression, a storm. It's interesting that the Americans have named the operation Desert Storm.
What do you believe the weather will be like in the Gulf region tomorrow?
The mass of cloud that you can see over Iraq is actually moving away out to the east, and the more broken cloud that's apparent in the southern part of this picture will be moving over Iraq tomorrow. So the Americans, in order to take advantage of that heavy cloud cover, really had to move as quickly as possible.